Your body undergoes many changes with aging as adult age. Some may experience normal age-related changes in memory and thinking. Dementia or severe memory loss that interferes with daily life is not part of the normal aging process. What is cognition? Cognition is a mental action or a process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the sense. It is the power of mind to learn and storing this information and life experience in the form of memory to be retrieved and used later on during lifespan to solve a problem, judging, using of language, perception, and so on. So cognition is a set of all mental abilities, which is related to knowledge, attention, memory, judgment, problem solving, decision making, and producing and using of language. We know that our brain is formed of many lobes, like the frontal lobe, the parietal, the occipital, and the temporal lobe. And there are many associated areas in our cerebral cortex. These associative areas are parts of our cerebral cortex, which receive inputs from multiple areas. They integrate incoming sensory information and also from connections between sensory and motor areas, because they are involved in organizing information that comes from various other areas of the brain. Associative areas are often linked to a complex of functions in our brain. The process of learning and memory are one of the mental processes or function. The learning is a process by which we learn new information and by which this new information is encoded, stored in our brain, and can be used later on, and we can retrieve it to use it in our life. Okay, and the memory, it is the stored information or experience in life. Okay, it is the power of the brain to recall past experience and information. It can be classified to secondary or long-term memory, which is permanent memory stored, ionic or echoic memory, which is sensory related mainly to sensory memory, and the primary working memory, which is a temporary stage of holding information for a while, during which the process of coding this information, which will be later on stored in the brain, and we can later on retrieve it and use it in our life. Memory, لما بنقول memory, it's the power of the brain to recall past experiences or information. In this faculty of the mind, information is passed by three processes. بيها بنقدر ان احنا نعمل storing للانفورميشن الاكسبيرينس اللي احنا we have passed through ونحولها الى memory. Okay, these three steps is by encoding the information, then storing and retrieval when we need to it. Okay, there are three types of memory: the sensory, the short-term, and the long-term memory. Actually, typically, when we think of the word memory, we are referring to long-term memory, but our minds also possess the sensory and short-term. And not all memories are the same, so different types function in different ways. Actually, let's start by talking about the sensory memory, which is our shortest form of memory. It is very, very short, and it depends on it acts actually as a buffer for the stimulus received through our five senses. The sensory memory subdivided into three types: the iconic memory, which refers to visual memory, it how the brain remembers an image you just saw moments ago. Okay, and it's usually not exceeding the storing of the information or the image, not beyond the zero point 0.5 second. Okay, half a second actually. Okay, so we lost it very in short time. The echoic memory, which is a second subtype, it's sometimes referred to auditory sensory memory. Okay, and usually actually it's an audio memories. Okay, it lasts for a maximum about 4 seconds. If you hear a few notes of a melody, you may be able to recall it back after it finishes immediately actually. Okay, and the third type and the last type of sensory is the haptic memory, which refers to memory involving the sense of touch. Okay, and it's not exceeding a few seconds, maybe maximum 4 seconds. Okay, and we lost it immediately after that. The second type of memory is the short-term memory. It's actually, we call it the working memory. It is very temporary. It has a low capacity, and the information being processed will either be quickly dismissed or entered into our long-term memory bank. It is sort of the precursor of long-term memory, which has many distinct facets with varied functionality. Maybe this is the reason why you might continually repeat a phone number as you walk toward your phone. You are keeping the number in your short-term memory. Okay, this is for example. The last type is the long-term memory. The long-term memory is the brain system for storing and managing and recalling information, and it is a very complex with different functioning. A sensory memories only flicker for less than a second, with short memory lasts only a few minutes, for a minute or two maximum. But the long-term memory includes anything from an event that occurred 5 minutes ago to something from 20 up to 20, or even for the whole lifespan. We will keep remembering it. Okay, sometimes they are conscious. They are requiring us to actively think in order to recall a piece of information. Other times they may be some unconscious, simply appearing without any active attempt for recollection. Okay, there are many types of this long-term memory. Let's start by example for the explicit memory, sometimes referred as conscious memory. This is the intentional recall of information. Okay, like when we are filling an application or something like that, we recall our personal information like the address, the telephone number, and etc. Okay. The second type of memory is the episodic memory, which is form of declarative memory, which includes the ability to remember many things in our life. Okay, like when someone asks us what we do in the weekend, we will try to remember all the things that happen during and around this part of time in order to recall these events or memory in particular. There is also the semantic memory, which is also a form of declarative, and it refers to the memory storage of vocabulary, key facts, names, and general knowledge. Okay. Implicit memory, we sometimes refer it to unconscious memory, which includes the retention of information from the time from the moment in time that cannot specifically be recalled. You know how something just okay. Like when we go with our parents when we were young مثلا ورحنا trip مع our parents okay somewhere ممكن إن when I am older I can go the same way by recalling the information that I have stored from the first time that I have gone to this place. The procedural memory, which is form of implicit memory. The procedural memory is the ability to recall how to do things from like riding a bike or driving a car, okay? We can perform it these procedures by when we experience it every day. Okay, there is also the visual spatial memory. Okay, is what will help us to associate a picture, like associating a picture of a pole with the word pole that we have learned. Okay, that we have learned during our lifetime. The factors that affecting learning in older age is the importance of attention. Okay, there is a selective attention, which is being able to focus on relevant information وإجنوري irrelevant information. اوكي ان انا اعمل سelection للاتنشن نفسه بان انا افوكس على الحاجات المهمه واجنور non important things. Okay, and sustain this attention by keeping myself alert and focusing on the specific stimulus for over a period of time to not to lose it if especially when this stimulus is sensory, okay, received by one of our five senses. Okay, and then the attention control, which is the ability to allocate attention among multiple stimuli. As we said before, that memory passes by three steps, or there are three concepts, which is by encoding or coding information, by converting environmental or mental stimuli into memorable brain codes, then store it or hold it to the information, okay, in our brain for a while in certain areas, okay, which is related to memory. Then we can retrieve it later by pulling the information from the storage. Actually, many scientists believe that the entire brain is involved in with memory. Um, the three main parts of the brain involved with memory are the amygdala, the hippocampus, the cerebellum, and the prefrontal cortex. Actually, the cerebral cortex receives nerve messages from eyes, ears, and touch sensors. Then the prefrontal cortex, which is the site of working memory, then reflexive long-term memory relies on the cerebellum and amygdala. Then the declarative long-term memory depends on the hippocampus and its temporal lobe. The long-term potentiation, where the short-term memory is transferred or changed to long-term memory, is thought to be encoded by modification on the synaptic strands. And actually, there is a great link between the neural activity and memory, where the release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which is vital in memory formation. The low levels of acetylcholine were known to be associated with Alzheimer's disease. The adrenaline and noradrenaline, where both are strengthen the memory when they are released into the bloodstream following the learning process. Also, estrogen and testosterone facilitate working memory. The biological basis of memory, the amnesia, which is severe memory loss, okay, the retrograde amnesia, which is inability to remember past episodic information, usually after head injury, or antegrade amnesia, which is inability to form new memories, and it's usually related to hippocampal areas damage. The Korsakoff syndrome, which has both retrograde and antegrade amnesia, which is to severe use of alcohol or severe damage to the brain. Where forgetting can occur. Actually, the sensory memory, as we said before, is a very, very short memory where it can last only for a few seconds, okay, where encoding failure will happen if we didn't work upon it, okay, like keep repeating a phone number or keep watching the image or keep repeating the sound that we have heard, okay, the information will be lost and will not be encoded to the brain to be transferred to long-term memory. Also, short-term memory, as we said, that it lasts for a few minutes, okay. If rehearsal failure occur, it will be completely lost, okay. And later on, if we work upon it, we can transfer it into long-term memory by encoding this learned information or experience, okay. Some of the information can be lost from the long-term memory if no retrieval or no use of this stored information happen, and trace decay will occur. And at all these steps, forgetting can occur and amnesia. In order to understand what happened with aging process to the brain and that may cause some decline for cognitive function or decline for memory, but it's not a rule. It's not a rule that it will happen to all elderly patients or elderly population. There are some age-related changes in the brain that happen with age. As the brain shrinks with age by about 5 to 10% and lose of its weight, the neuron die through aging or illness. The acetylcholine production on the nucleus will decline to its half, okay, by the age, which is very important for learning and memorization and neuronal activity. The dopamine production by the substantia nigra will lose its line by about 35 to 40%. The ref nucleus, which is related to the mood and the appetite, as it produces serotonin, there is neuronal or nuclear loss by 35 to 40%. The hippocampus loses about 5% of its neuron through aging. All these factors will interact together or collaborate, causing decrease and decline for cognitive ability, which may start at the age of 40 and continues and until the age of 80. Actually, there are some age-related changes in the brain, as we said before, that will affect our cognitive function and memory, and may lead to the presence or the complaint of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. These age-related changes in the brain varies from person to person. As the brain function decline, different action of the brain are affected at different times. For example, the short-term memory, which is the ability to learn new material, okay, as we said, although it's also remain for a very, very short time or period of time, so it will be affected relatively early in elder people. Okay, also the verbal abilities, which is the semantic or the vocabulary and word usage, may be declined to about half by the age of 70. Also the intellectual performance, which is the ability to process information regardless of its speed. Okay, it's usually maintained until at least the age of 80. لو ما حصلش أي underlying vascular أو neurological disorder affect the brain function. Now let's talk about the dementia and the Alzheimer's disease, which is very common nowadays, or one of the major complaint and syndrome among elderly population. It varies from a mild decline for cognitive ability to severe forms of complete cognitive loss and memory loss, which is dementia. Actually, it's formed of many subtypes, okay, which will be discussed later. Dementia is a neurodegenerative disease where there is loss, particularly in the cortex. Dementia actually defined as loss of the cognitive function, thinking, remembering, and reasoning. And the behavioral ability to such an extent that it interferes with the ability of daily living, okay, and activities. It interferes with the person activity of the daily living. He cannot pass, he cannot feed himself, and also instrumental activity may be also affected to some extent. At that time, usually the elderly come and complain on the clinic from such cognitive decline. The causes of dementia can vary depending on the type of brain changes that may be taking place. There are many types like Alzheimer disease, which is the most common cause of dementia in older adults. Other forms are the dementia of Lewy bodies, the prefrontal, the vascular dementia, the mixed Parkinson dementia. Okay. Actually, to understand what's happened in dementia and what causes such cognitive decline, okay, in this slide and the upcoming 2 to 3 slides, okay, we will discuss the pathology of dementia and what's happened actually in the brain and causes such decline and loss of the neuron. In the membrane of the neuron, there are particular protein which is called amyloid precursor protein, APP. One of its end is in the inside of the cell, and the other side is outside. There are two enzymes actually which help and causing cleavage of such protein for renewal. This amyloid protein helps the neuron to repair and grow after injury. Since this amyloid beta protein is like other protein, it gets broken and recycled. Normally, it gets chopped up by an enzyme called alpha and gamma secretase, which chops the body. These chopped particles are soluble. If an enzyme called beta secretase acts instead of the alpha secretase, then we have got a problem. As the formed beta amyloid, which will be left after cleavage, will be insoluble. These monomers will be chemically sticky, bond together, form a plug which is potentially get between the neurons, so it will affect the signaling transfer between the cells. Also, these monomers activate the immune system as they will be antigenic, causing inflammation. That is why dementia or Alzheimer particularly is considered to be neurodegenerative and causes apoptosis of the neurons. And in addition, may deposits in the vessels, on the blood vessels, causing amyloid angiopathy. So it affects the transfer of nutrients and the blood supply of the neurons. Actually, to understand the fibrillary tangles, which is very characteristic in the dementia also, we know that there are tau protein between the cells. We know that the cells are held together by cytoskeleton, which is microtubule, which act as a track-like structure. It allows the transfer of signals and nutrients. There are tau protein is present between these macrotubules and act to hold them together and keep intact. This tau protein act as a railway ties. اوكي، يعني بتعمل زي بالظبط اللي هي الخشب موجود بين الاجزاء بتاع السكك الحديد عشان تمسك القضبان مع بعضيها. اوكي. For unknown reason, the beta amyloid may act by activation of kinase enzyme inside the neurons and activate transfer and binding of phosphate group to tau protein. So it stops supporting the microtubules and clumps up with other tau proteins and get tangled together and form the characteristic neurofibrillary tangles in dementia. Okay. Actually, there are other causes on the pathological changes that may take place and predisposing to the occurrence of dementia. As the apolipoprotein E on allele 4, where this apolipoprotein E is a major cholesterol carrier support lipid. It supports the transfer of cholesterol, also the fat soluble vitamins. So this allows the repair of neurons. Actually, the person with amyloid beta on amyloid lipoproteins on E in allele 4 are at increased risk, and as it has important role in the amyloid beta deposition, form senile plaques and senile plaques. Active also the mutation in presenilin 1 or presenilin 2 genes on chromosome 19 or chromosome 1. They are both protein subunits of gamma secretase. Mutation in these two genes can change the location where gamma secretase chops amyloid beta protein, producing different lengths of beta amyloid, which clump and form the plaques that we have mentioned before. This is actually the pathology that we must understand at first to understand what's actually happened on the neurons and cause decline in each function and loss of their capability of restoring or including the information to be stored in the brain as a memory and perform, of course, another function. In this slide, as we see that we have on Alzheimer's disease, we see the tau protein that we have mentioned before and how it holds the macrotubules together, the amyloid plaques which aggregate and accumulate due to chops of the amyloid precursor protein at different sites than the usually alpha and gamma secretase cleavage at certain points, okay, and the beta secretase act instead. Actually, we also see how the changes that occur in the anatomical changes on the brain. Like we see that there are cortical decline and shrinkage on mild and severe Alzheimer. there is moderately enlarged ventricle, there is shrinking of the hippocampus, which is very important part in memory. So all these changes may interact together to causing such decline that is associated and characteristic in dementia and the forms and different types of Alzheimer's disease, of different types of dementia. And actually, dementia is a general term for a group of brain disorder which affect usually the memory and the memory, which is will have its impact on the person, the language, the thoughts, the navigation, the behavior, the personality, and mood. And as we have mentioned before, under the umbrella of dementia, there are some types, okay, which are well known. Actually, they are related and identical to each other for some extent, okay, and have each one of them have some characteristic for it. The first type is the Alzheimer's disease, the mixed dementia, the dementia of Lewy bodies, the frontotemporal dementia, the vascular dementia, mixed dementia, the Parkinson's disease dementia. All these types lie underneath the umbrella of dementia. And in order to understand dementia, we must at first differentiate it from delirium, which is acute stage, but dementia is actually a chronic stage. Okay, actually, the causes of dementia may be reversible or irreversible. The irreversible type, which is like Alzheimer's disease, the vascular dementia, the frontotemporal dementia, Lewy bodies dementia, and others. And while the reversible dementia is related to depression and delirium, the emotional disorders, the metabolic disorder like hypothyroidism, the nutritional as deficiency on some important traces like B12, eye and ear impairment, and impairment for sense organs or five senses, the tumors, the infections, some medications or drug intake, also alcohol. Actually, the clinical presentation will be the patient will be presented for dementia. Okay, is the confusion with time and location, the difficulty completing familiar tasks, the poor in judgment, the difficulty in solving problem. They become socially isolated and withdraw from all social activity. There will be verbal and mental difficulty. Okay, on later stage may be not capable of performing sentence or saying some few words. There will be depression or abnormal emotional behaviors. Okay, there will be difficulty in thinking or judgment. There will be wandering. All this will have its impact on the elderly person and will affect, of course, his activity of the daily living. Okay, and he will start to complain. We can classify the stages of dementia or Alzheimer's disease into early stage, middle stage, or late stage. In early stage, there are common symptoms like problems coming up with the right words. He cannot use the semantic memory as using the proper words, trouble in remembering some names of a person, trouble with performing tasks, forgetting material one has just read, or trouble in planning and organizing, and mood change or forget of the recent event. Usually the short-term memory is affected earlier than the long-term memory. But the common strengths and points are: he is able to express oneself verbally, he is able to converse intellectually, understand spoken language, he can be engaged in work, or some social activities, able to self-advocate or to write, use memory strategies. The long-term memory, as we said before, is intact for a period of time, able to continue using the technology. Emotions is intact, imagination, desires, and spiritual being. On the middle stage, those people need more support to help them manage the activity of daily living. They become easily have a mood or emotional swinging from angerness to aggressiveness, perhaps because they are feeling frustrated. They become confused, uh, wandering some, and becoming lost. Become confused about time also, and getting up at night usually, and we sometimes misdiagnosed is with depression. Okay, put themselves or other at risk through their forgetfulness, behave in ways that you seem unusual, such as going outside in their night clothes, experience difficulty with perception, and in some cases having hallucination. At the late stage, they become fully and totally dependent on other, either in their activity of daily living or instrumental activity. There is loss of memory, which become very pronounced. The person unable to recognize familiar objects or surrounding. Here, the long-term memory is also affected. The person may also become increasingly fragile and frail. Okay, he becomes strained or restricted to his wheelchair or become bedridden. Difficulty in eating and swallowing. There is considerable weight loss because of malnutrition, of course. There is incontinence or losing of the control, and there is gradual loss of speech due to failure of using or affection of the semantic memory. They may repeat a few words or cry out from time to time. Nowadays, we should evaluate all the elderly population who is attending the clinic, the geriatric clinic, or during the periodic medical examination or checkup or visits, okay, to evaluate their cognitive and mental state for early detection of any decline or deterioration of their cognitive or mental abilities. This can be done by many tests or many skills used nowadays for such evaluation. There is the mini mental state examination, Follish-Tins, which is formed of 30-item test, the clock drawing, the verbal fluency test, the mini-cock test, Cambridge, the frontal temporal battery evaluation, the modified mini mental, and cognitive ability screening instrument. And such personal-centered approach promotes personal worth and uniqueness. There is social confidence, respect, dignity, trustfulness, independence, engagement, and hope. Okay, and also we can nowadays use cognitive stimulation therapy for improving the cognitive function and abilities of the elderly population and stimulate them and make them overcome the slight declines, especially on the early stages of dementia. They can overcome the obstacle and the cut-off points of declining of the cognitive function. Thank you at the end. Thank you for your attention and concern.